Right, this is pretty much our final video where we're doing coding anyways. And what we'll be doing in this video is we'll be sort of tidying up our project and getting it in a sort of final state for building. So a lot of what we'll be doing is cleaning up the code that we already wrote and sort of porting over code from our previous project, which I'll be basically copying and pasting most of that. I don't want to take too much time. I want to just sort of get through this. So yeah, so the first thing we'll do is we got to handle our ghost collision behavior. We never really did do that. So for that, what we're going to do, getting right to it, is go to our enemies script, and we're going to want to make the onCollisionEnter2D method, which is tied into the event. We're going to want to make it virtual, so we can override it for the ghost. Ghost can have its own implementation. We're not going to want to have the default type of implementation. We'll have it slightly different for the ghost. So we'll say simply protected virtual void. So just make that change. And now we'll set up a overrided version of this in the ghost script. So we'll flesh it out later, but right now we'll just say protected override void on CollisionEnter2D. It sees already that we need this having or that we have the option having a virtual method of this name in the base class. So remove the call to the base method and simply put for now if call.gameObject.tag is equivalent to player. And we'll come back and flesh this out in a moment. All right, so actually for the ghost, let's do this. We're actually going to keep the collider in the rigid body. So just comment that out or remove it. We're going to want to set the rigid body as isKinematic. So actually first the collider radius equals 0.16f and body.isKinematic is true. And what the ghost is going to end up doing is, instead of killing our player, you can't really kill a ghost, and a ghost shouldn't be able to kill you, so we're going to have it spook the player. So let's go back to the player controller and change some code here. So we'll make move speed static, public static, and we'll want to have another field here for public static bool is spooked and a spook timer that we'll set later in this class. So basically it'll spook us for some given amount of time. Let's move this down here, make it a little bit more appealing. Now we'll access these static fields back in the Ghost's onCollisionEnter2D event. So when it collides with our player, it will get the player controller dot is spooked bool, set it to true, and basically what this will amount to is it'll make us a little slower. It will decrement our speed by 1. So minus equals 1. And we'll want to destroy the ghost, because basically there's no way of escaping our ghost enemy. And once we get touched by it, it just leaves, basically. So gameObject.destroy gameObject. And so to set up a method to handle what happens to the player when the ghost collides with it, let's go back to the player controller and let's create a method in this class, private to this class. So private void spooked check. And I'll just write this out. Should be pretty easy to understand what's going on here. So start with we're going to need a lerping behavior. We're going to make Cheesehead a little green under the gills when he gets spooked. So we'll start with a private or a local variable here called lerp2 and a float called lerp speed. And we'll simply say if is spooked we'll we'll set the spook timer, first of all. Spook timer plus equals time.delta time times 60. So incrementing roughly 1 at 60 frames per second on each frame. lerp2 0, and lerp speed will be 0.6f. Else, make sure that we're not green under the gills. So lerp2 will equal 1, and lerp speed will do a little bit quicker. If he's in fact been spooked, we'll lerp quickly out of this looking spooked, looking green under the gills, so do a little quicker otherwise. And then we'll need the sprite renderer to make it look, the cheese head look green, so we'll say get components in children, because we're going to want to make the entire cheese head green, including his fist, for example. So components in children, they'll return a array, right? So of type sprite render, we want all the sprite renders, and we'll store that in a variable called renderers local to this method. So this is going to be a little bit expensive, I guess you could say. Once we call this on every frame in update, it's going to be using get component, sort of a bit of an expensive method itself, but whatever, it'll do the job. I'm not too worried about taking up CPU cycles with this little game. So sprite renderer, it's going to return, this method is going to return an array of sprite renders, so call it renderers. And then we'll iterate through those renderers. So for each sprite renderer in renderers, I can just do it on one line here, do the lerp. So color.lerp pass in the renderer.color for the starting point to new color, and we'll simply type in the red property of the RGB of the color, lerp2, so lerp to 0 if we get spooked, which will result in a greener hue to our cheese head. lerp2 and 1, 1, 1 for G, B, and A inputs. And we'll do it at lerp speed times time.delta time. And of course we have to assign that to the renderer.color. And also we need to reset the spook timer. So if spook timer, we'll have it going for roughly 3 seconds at 60 frames per second. So if spook timer is greater than 180, 60 times 3, we'll reset the spook timer to 0. Move speed will be reset to its ordinary value, 3. I guess we could make this a constant, but whatever. Just going to set it here to 3. It's not going to change. Is spooked is false as well. All right, let's just try that out. Actually, to try it out, what I'll do here is in the enemy's factory, instead of picking a random instance of our enemy, we'll pick the ghost, which is case 5. So we'll just say 5 temporarily here for testing. Oh, of course we have to check on update, spook check. So just put here, spook check. We'll run this and see if we indeed get spooked, and then after 3 seconds roughly unspooked. There's Ghostly Gale. Yep, looks like we're spooked. We're turning green around the gills. And after about 3 seconds, we go back to a regular move speed. All right, awesome. So change that back to and what else? Okay, so in the on collision enter 2D, we never did check to make sure it's just colliding with the player. Otherwise, it'll run this when it collides with just about anything, including platforms for that matter. So say if call.gameObject.tag is equivalent to player. Basically wrap that in here. That'll fix any sort of, you might get null references otherwise, so that'll also fix that. We also had an error I noticed if we're holding down the direction key when we start the game. See, our cheese head now is on the far left, much farther than it should be, and this throws off the whole camera script that we have. So let's just fix that by placing our cheese head squarely at the center of the screen when the game starts. You see here we have this error. You assigned its value for copy, but it's never used. Yeah, that's not necessary the way we did that. So let's just quickly fix that too. That was for the tiling script, right? Yeah, I basically showed you this to show you how you can assign something to a variable as it's being passed into a method, right? You can do it all in the same place. But you actually don't need this field at all, so we'll just delete this, and it should also fix that error, because it's in principle possible that this will never be assigned, so that's why it's complaining of that error. So we just simply pass in the enum just like that. That'll fix that. We also have in the out of bounds method here, yeah, we also, I noticed, had enemies that were flying way upwards, and sometimes they didn't stop moving because of, I guess, add force kept adding to a previous add force and just kept going on forever seemingly. So let's just add a condition or another case in which we destroy the out of bounds enemy, say, or if the transform.position.y is greater than, say, 20 units, then we'll also destroy it. Right? It's because presumably it's going to just keep going up and up and up. So that fixes that. You may have also noticed in the previous video that our cheese head was sticking to the sides of the platform. There's a lot of ways to fix that issue. One way is our cheese head is a square collider, right? Or box collider. So you could change it to a circle collider that doesn't catch then on any sort of right angles. That's basically what's happening here. You can add a slippery material. I showed you materials in the previous video, I think. You can do that to solve the problem. Also, actually related to this is the surface arc of the effector. That should be changed too. Should make it a little wider or smaller. Can't remember which. So let's go to the prefabs here. And for the surface arc for platform grassy, we'll change that to 160. And that will just make it so that we don't actually catch the edges when we go up, when we're sort of going upwards. And we'll want to do the same here for the rubber platform. And yeah, so I think the way I want to solve this once and for all is to just give the cheese head a slippery material. So we have a materials folder here. Let's create another material. Physics 2D material, call it slippery. And what we'll do is we'll just basically have 0 friction and 0 bounciness and just apply this to the cheesehead collider. And this will just make it so that he doesn't catch on anything. Just like that. All right, so next I want to sort of add a HUD the way we did in our previous project. So basically we'll be copying and pasting a lot of the code we used in that project. No sense really to type it out all over again. If you want to go back to those old lessons and figure out how to do it, go right on ahead. But for now, I'll just sort of copy and paste all this code. And it's been modified a bit so that it works with this project. And actually the first thing I want to do is create a HUD game object under the main camera. So create empty, call it HUD. And in scripts.world, let's create a heads up display script. So heads up display, and put that on the HUD. So I'll just copy and paste this in. I already wrote this, so you can feel free to pause and just write that all out if you want to. As we did in the previous project, we're going to want to change the font style in the inspector here. Make it white, make it stand out, and we'll also bold it. All right, we'll also want a game over manager like we had before, so I'll be pretty much copying and pasting a lot of that as well. So let's start off with parenting a game over game object to the main camera. So we'll call this game over. We'll want a script for this too. Might as well create the script now. It's called Game Over Manager. We'll just put that on the Game Over game object. We'll want a sprite renderer. And I'll just import these images that we'll need. I almost forgot here. I didn't add the font for our HUD, so let me just do that now. And import that as well. Not absolutely necessary, but it's a little added touch. This font is referenced in the HUD heads-up display script. All right, back over to Game Over. The Game Over game object. We'll want the Game Over sprite here and put on the player layer, sorting on the first ordering layer. Make sure it's 1 on the Z value, and the opacity should start off as all the way down to start off with. And we'll want to parent to this another game object. Once again, you can go back to the previous lesson that handled this to see why exactly I'm doing it this way. So restart. For that game object, I'm gonna want the press enter sprite and put this at 2.5. actually minus 2.5. This will also be on the player layer. And we'll want a script for this as well. So we'll call this Game Start Manager. And make sure to put it here. We're going to want a start button for the Game Start Manager, as well as pausing. We'll have that again as well. So in the Input Manager, we'll just add an axis here. Just need 5. Call this one Start. Make it the return key, or enter key, however you prefer, but you need to write in return. We don't have an alt button for that. And the Game Start Manager, as before, it will just sort of reload the level. So the Game Start Manager, just once again, I'll copy and paste this, and you can pause the video to write this out on your end. Pretty simple code though. And we also have the Game Over Manager. Same thing, I'll copy and paste that, because it's pretty much as before with some minor modifications. This will have to recognize when it's game over, so for that we're going to need to add is game over to the on collision enter 2D in the enemy class, or access to it anyways. We'll access the static bool by going to the enemy class, and after we've done all this, we'll simply say it's game over. So game over manager dot is game over equals true. And to make sure that this works right with loading the scene, just want to remember to add the scene to the project in the build settings. So for this, just add current. That should be good enough for that. And for pause functionality, we're going to want to, I'll copy and paste this as well, go to the World Manager script, and we'll want a game pause method. As well as a private bool pause switch, and in update we'll call game pause. And before I forget, I'll set this to vsync equals 1. Make sure it's vsynced, so to avoid screen tearing and jitteriness and such when we actually build a project. And right, the camera keeps moving when it's game over, unless we basically, well, the camera follows the cheese head. So if we zero out the position for the cheese head, that'll prevent that from happening. So in the enemy class, for the on collision enter 2D, what we'll do is, well, we'll change some of this code up. So we'll say rigid body 2D, cheese body equals call.gameObject. Get component, get the rigid body, because we'll need to reference it again. So store it to cheese body, and then we'll say cheese body dot velocity equals new vector 2, zero it out, and same thing here. We'll want to do this again, and we'll still want to do the add force to push them up in the air. So just say cheese body dot add force, like that. Oh, the Stomper, I noticed it wasn't exactly catching some of our enemies, so I want to make it a little bit larger. So let's go to our Cheesehead Stomper and make the collider a little larger. So make this minus 0.35 and 0.2 on Y. There you go, looks a little bit bigger. And there's that pop sound effect that I want to play, not just when we stomp on an enemy, but also when we destroy it in general. So maybe a bit of a goofy way of doing this, but it'll work. So in the do damage method, here where we check if basically the hit points are to 0 and we destroy the game object, we can then access that pop sound that we already have, that popping sound, and play it here. So it's a little bit goofy because we'll have to access it from the Stomper game object. I would have probably made the popping sound somewhere else, more globally accessible, I guess you could say, if I knew I was going to be reusing it, but whatever, this will work. So find the Stomper, run get component, get the audio source, and then just play that popping sound, and then destroy the game object. Also took the liberties to make a little bit of a musical theme for this game, so I want to add that to this project, just to add a little bit of flair at the very end. So we'll want on the main camera an audio source. I'll import this little loop. Platformer theme loop that I made. I'll be looping and play on awake and turn the volume down a little bit on it to 0.75. And while I'm at it with audio, I also wanted to change the jumping sound a little bit, so it's pretty much a pitch that's consistent with the music. I guess I'm maybe taking this a little bit too seriously, but anyways, I'll just make that little change. So 1.35 for the jumping sound effect. All right, and that looks like that's about it. This project is pretty much done. If you want to build a project, maybe go back to the video for the previous project that had to do with the final build settings, just apply that to this project and you'll be good to go. So, all right, that's the last lesson video. The next video will be a series wrap up, and we'll also talk a bit about where to go from here. See you there.